When I first started teaching at Wharton, I thought I was a strategy guy. I didn't know anything about business ethics. I didn't know anything about the field or who the people were, but because I thought business and ethics ought to go together. I didn't know that most of the people who did business separated them into business and ethics.
What were your initial goals and expectations?
I've always seen myself as somebody who had something to say about business. And because I'm trained as a philosopher, I had something to say about ethics. But I thought it was nothing but complete common sense that companies created value for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people with the money. So as I learned more about the field of business ethics, that I thought we needed more ideas. We needed more people who were trained in philosophy, but who actually knew something about business. I had spent 5 years doing essentially consulting with companies all over the world. And so that became one of the kind of driving forces for me, was how you put a real practical knowledge about business and good thinking about ethics together. I taught at Wharton for 5 or 6 years. I was a strategy guy. I then moved to University of Minnesota, who offered me tenure, and I started to teach business ethics. I started to write more for people in business ethics, since quite honestly the strategy people didn't care at all. I wanted to write about stakeholder theory in the sense that business people can understand it, and in the sense that people who do business ethics and social issues and management can understand it. It's work I feel like I have to do. If I look back and say, well, gee, so what's the last 40 years been about? I think I'd have to say I've just been a voice that asks people to think about customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people with the money, and a voice that asks people to think about not separating business and ethics. So if I had to name those things, I would say they were stakeholder theory, for which I get too much credit. The second thing would be this idea called the separation fallacy, that business and ethics are separate and should be separate. I think ultimately that's probably more important than thinking about stakeholder theory. As a philosophical pragmatist, there's no contradiction between thinking about empirical research and thinking about conceptual research. In fact, those things are always intertwined. Yet we make those distinctions in the business disciplines in a way that I think prevents really interesting work from being done. Of the thing I think I am most proud of the last 40 years, that's easy for me. I've had some terrific students, and to be a part of their career and what they have accomplished, they'll do far more than I ever have.
What were some of the big initial questions you faced in the field?
And then there were lots of questions about ethics and how we think about ethics. I used to put that as, what is there, how do we know, what are we going to do about it? Those questions I saw as questions that philosophers had not a monopoly on answering, but they had some skills in trying to answer those questions. But they needed to be answered with a knowledge of real business.
In your opinion, is doing business ethics a new profession?
Business has been around, since before, we lived in cities and all that sort of stuff. People have been value creators and traders for millennia. Interesting question here to me is, the first question of political philosophy has always been, how's the state justified? Well, it's supposed to be changed then. Suppose the first question of political philosophy were, how's value creation and trade possible? And then we ask, so what's the role of the state? We might get some really very different answers for that. You can look at someone like Plato or Aristotle. They both had views of business. Plato's view, especially on leadership, is extremely relevant for business today. Dominic Scott at Oxford and I are trying to write a book called something like Plato on Leadership. And we've sort of taken Plato's ideas, his metaphors of leadership, and kind of mapped them into both leadership theory and some business leaders of today. And it's very relevant stuff. I dare say, this is going to come out wrong, I know, but I dare say it's almost as interesting as the leadership journals.
What questions about ethics and corporate responsibility have we been able to deal with coherently?
If I think about it for a second, the questions about ethics and corporate responsibility, I mean, I don't think they're settled, but I think one thing is settled. Corporations have a moral responsibility to their stakeholders. I think that's pretty much a settled question. It certainly is in business. Most business leaders that I know understand this. They don't always get it right. And one of the problems with the field of business ethics is we engage in what I would call saints and sinners thinking. You know, most businesses are sinners because money's bad and profits are bad, but there are a few good companies. And then when those few good companies screw up, they're sinners. Oscar Wilde put this best when he said, every saint's got a past, every sinner's got a future. We need to get out of this saints and sinners thinking. There are very few saints.
What issues and questions will need to be addressed in the next 20 years?
In the next 20 years, business ethics ought to be a really exciting field to be in. We have incredible new technologies, but I've never been much fan of the trolley problem thinking in ethics. But the problem of autonomous cars is a trolley problem. If you think about the ethics issues in things like AI, you think about privacy, you think about what kind of human beings are we going to be when most of our face-to-face is mediated by screens? How are we going to be able to form relationships? How are people going to be able to fall in love? I think those questions about who we are as human beings, we're on the edge of this incredible technological society, and Plato's still relevant. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. It's got to be grounded in real business, real technology. It's got to be grounded in a variety of thinking about ethics. And we can't keep having these saints and sinners, facts and values, those kind of distinctions, which don't help us very much.